Ellie, so let's get into this. I walked out of the theater the other night, saw this play, Emergence.
Oh, yeah. What was it like?
My head was just buzzing. It's this really immersive thing, psychedelic visuals, great music, dance, the whole shebang.
Wow, sounds intense.
It was. And it completely threw me back, like back to being a teenager, lying awake wondering about, well, the really big stuff.
The big stuff, like,
Yeah, like, why am I here? What even is time? All those questions. It was surprisingly powerful, actually.
that's really interesting how an external experience, something like a play, can just crack open those huge fundamental questions again.
Exactly. The ones we all sort of grapple with sometimes, right?
Sure, at different points in life, yeah.
And that's kind of what we want to dig into today for you. Why these questions, the ones that maybe don't have answers, why they captivate us so much.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a couple of interesting angles. First, there's this Psychology Today article. The author had a really similar reaction to Emergence, actually, and talks about their own journey with these big ideas.
Okay. Art as a catalyst.
Right. And then we're going to look at something a bit different. Goodreads reviews for a book called PsyQ, a mind-bending miscellany of everyday psychology.
Ah, so kind of the flip side. From the grand existential to the more everyday workings of the mind.
Exactly. We've got the artistic trigger for deep thoughts, and then this book that's more about the nuts and bolts of how we think day to day.
Sounds like a good mix, exploring the human need for meaning from, well, quite different viewpoints.
Yeah. So the Psychology Today author, they mentioned being really frustrated with those massive unanswerable questions early on, like just hitting a wall.
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling.
Totally. So they turned to science. Geometry, quantum physics, medicine, neuroscience, psychology.
Things with answers, or at least a method for finding them.
Exactly. Fields where you can actually solve problems, find concrete stuff. That desire for something solid you can really grasp.
It makes you wonder about that need for resolution, doesn't it? Science offers a path to certainty, or at least testable hypotheses. Maybe that's especially appealing when you're facing the fuzziness of philosophical questions.
That's a good question. Does leaning into science mean you, dismiss the philosophical side? Or
Or maybe they just serve different needs, both valuable but in different ways.
could be, because then, bam, this play Emergence comes along. Psychedelic questioning reality. The author says it just brought all those old, big questions rushing back.
Yeah, it sounds like it really shook things up. Art doing what art does best, maybe. Disrupting our neat little boxes.
Right, bypassing the logical part of the brain and hitting something deeper.
Exactly. Reawakening those curiosities we might have shelved.
And the author contrasts that with their younger self, who was really into Eastern philosophy.
Mm.
Lao Tzu, Alan Watts, Krishnamurti, all about mindfulness, just being instead of constantly thinking.
Ah, interesting. So that inward-looking mindfulness approach.
Yeah, versus the later scientific method, hypothesis, experiment, data.
It really highlights the different toolkits we have, doesn't it? Introspection versus observation, conceptual frameworks versus empirical evidence.
Wholly different ways of trying to figure things out.
And people might lean one way or the other or find value in both at different times in their lives.
But here's the twist I found really interesting. The author realizes that even without getting those final answers, why am I here? What happens after we die? Just thinking about them
Yeah.
was actually enjoyable. It sparked feelings of, awe. The same feeling as seeing, I don't know, the Grand Canyon or something.
That is fascinating. So the value isn't necessarily in the answer, but in the asking, in the journey of questioning itself.
Seems like it.
There's something profound about that curiosity, that sense of wonder. Maybe that's just fundamentally human, even without the promise of a neat conclusion.
Okay, so let's switch tracks a bit to this book, PsyQ. The reviews on Goodreads. They describe it as exploring how we perceive things, how we think, form opinions, using puzzles, jokes, little summaries of psychology experiments.
Right, so much more focused on the mechanics of our minds and everyday life.
Yeah, and one reviewer made a good point that just understanding how most people tend to answer these kinds of everyday psychology questions can actually be pretty revealing in itself.
Interesting. So while Emergence prompted these vast existential thoughts, PsyQ zooms in on our sort of cognitive habits.
Exactly. How our minds work on a practical level, shown through these engaging, almost playful ways.
And you can definitely see how that connects back, though.
How so?
Well, some of those everyday psychological things like logical fallacies or the biases that skew our decisions, They inevitably touch on bigger questions about how rational we really are, or why we believe the things we do.
Right, like one review mentioned an example about taboo statements. Even if people intellectually knew a belief was nonsense,
Well,
they still had a strong gut reaction against the taboo.
exactly. It hints at these deeper, maybe less rational, almost instinctive layers influencing how we think and react.
So our everyday mental quirks might actually shape how we approach those huge philosophical questions.
I think that's a crucial link, yeah. Our built-in biases, our cognitive shortcuts, they probably influence which big ideas or answers feel more comfortable or appealing to us.
Plus, IQ sounds like it's really interactive. Tests, quizzes.
Letting you examine your own patterns.
Yeah, and you can see how that kind of self-discovery, figuring out your own psychological tendencies, could be really relevant when you are wrestling with those bigger questions about who you are and your place in the universe.
Absolutely. Gaining that self-awareness about your own cognitive processes gives you a new lens, doesn't it?
A new perspective on why you think the way you do about the big stuff.
Precisely. Knowing your own mental landscape might offer clues about how you personally navigate and interpret those grander ideas.
Of course, we should mention some reviewers did say PsyQ is more introductory. It doesn't go super deep on every single topic.
Sure, an overview rather than an exhaustive analysis.
And the Psychology Today article, well, that's one person's reflection. It's not claiming to be the definitive take on philosophy or neuroscience.
That's a really important piece of context. It reminds us that these are complex fields. We get different perspectives, different levels of depth from different sources.
It's all part of building a bigger picture, right? Even if the picture is never quite finished.
Exactly. Our understanding keeps evolving.
Which brings us back to that final thought from the Psychology Today author. This idea of just continuing to mull over these huge issues, but in like manageable steps.
Taking it bit by bit.
Yeah, they even mentioned the ancient Greeks warning about maybe going a bit mad if you try to see too much reality all at once.
Right. A good reminder not to get totally overwhelmed.
It suggests the value isn't in finding the answer right now, but maybe in just keeping the conversation going, with yourself, with the questions.
Cultivating an ongoing dialogue, respecting the complexity, that seems key. Allowing understanding to unfold over time rather than demanding instant clarity.
So wrapping this up, it really seems like this deep human fascination with the big questions about existence, reality, meaning it's a powerful, enduring thing.
Definitely.
We saw how art, like that play Emergence, can totally reignite it.
Yeah.
And how even understanding our everyday psychology, like through PsyQ, gives us clues about how we process and grapple with these massive ideas.
It points to this fundamental human drive, doesn't it? The need to seek meaning, to try and make sense of it all.
Yeah, whether you're drawn to philosophy or the rigor of science or just understanding your own mind.
That process of questioning and exploring seems central to the human experience.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about your own life, your own experiences, and the different approaches we've touched on, art, science, psychology. What do you feel like the most valuable part of wrestling with questions that might not have clear answers?
Is it the chance for some kind of personal aha moment?
Or maybe it's more about honing your critical thinking skills through the process.
Or is it simply that feeling, that sense of wonder, of awe that contemplating these mysteries can bring?
Something for you to keep pondering in your own way.